Well, as you know, I've been doing Zen and teishos, one Zen and the Tao, and Zen and Kabbalah. And as I mentioned last week, I'm going to do Zen and science tonight. Of course, it's a huge subject. Science is a huge, multi-faceted pursuit. So I'm going to base it on one particular book. You may have seen the review a couple of weeks ago in the New York Times. A book less than 100 pages called 7 Brief Lessons on Physics for people who know nothing, he says, about science. This is a good introduction. He's Italian, Carlo Rovelli, who works in France, a physicist. It's, of course, very clear, as you would expect of a scientist, but it's also got a wonderful poetic, contemplative, I don't think he calls himself a mystic, but a very contemplative poetic quality which you would expect from a middle-aged Italian. So it is definitely a book worth reading. So I'm going to base some of these comparisons on what he has to say here. As I say, he's very contemplative. In the first chapter on Einstein's general theory of relativity, he calls it a masterpiece, and it's one of the great masterpieces of human striving, of human creation. He compares it to Mozart's Requiem, to the Odyssey, to King Lear, to the Sistine Chapel, something of such sublime beauty and depth, which is perfectly true. So the general theory of relativity is the first of seven chapters. And if you know anything about relativity, general relativity, you know that it basically says that all of reality, and what we call created reality, all reality that we know is interrelated, that space, time, and gravity, and matter are all dimensions of each other. They're all interrelated. So that's why space bends. He says the gravitational field that bends, and then that's a function of matter, is space. The space is not some box, empty box in which things are. The space itself is the gravitational field that bends and twists. And as he says too, there's like in waves as well, which of course is a very traditional Zen description of reality. It's a wave, it's like ocean, and we are the waves. So we're the particles, the waves, we're the matter, we're those waves. So it's interesting that, and of course, waves, light waves, etc. Scientific theory. So, so space bends, and time is in function of that, and time is in function of matter, and matter and energy are all interrelated, as you know. So, and that's a very Zen insight. That independent co-arising, that everything that is intimately related, everything is connected to everything else. Nothing exists by itself, in itself, but everything is closely intertwined and interrelated, kind of like a big gumball or something that stretches out and stretches back in. So, and that's one of the things he does say. Well, I'll get to that in a second. But the second chapter is about the other great theory, as you may know, of reality, which is quantum physics, quantum mechanics, which sees individual packets rather than waves, their whole as billions of galaxies in our own, billions of suns in our own solar system, and then the billions of solar systems in the galaxy, and the billions of galaxies. Oh my God! So the point he makes, and which Zen and any contemplative tradition would immediately insist upon, is your perspective matters. So much of our perspective on reality is our own creation based on very limited, it says this in a number of chapters, very limited capacities for understanding and very limited understanding within those capacities. Immanuel Kant spoke a lot about how our own specific capacity for perception and judging, forms reality. We don't really know what it is in itself. But, science here reminds us of the same thing. We have to continually let go of our conceptual frameworks and open ourselves to something much, much bigger than we imagine. Totally Zen. We're always always saying, let go, let go, let go of all your thoughts and ideas about anything, including especially yourself and the universe, and just be open to the experience. And that's the way science progresses, and that's the way we progress in terms of our moral and our spiritual life. You know, what he has to say about time, and he has a whole chapter on what he calls granular space, I think. What does he call it? Particles. Oh, yes, so elementary particles, you know. Again, they're not really particles so much, they're quanta, but they're like wavelets in space. Or in that they are that reality. As he says, the particles do not have a pebble-like reality any more than the electrons do, but they're quanta of corresponding fields, like photons in an electromagnetic field. They are minuscule moving wavelets that disappear and reappear according to strange laws. So where everything that exists is never stable, but it's nothing but a jump from one interaction to another. The Chinese Zen master could have said that. So the fifth lesson is on the particles, and then the fifth lesson is on grains of space. Once again, kind of like grains. Space itself appears like grains, and he calls it like chain mail. Chain mail reality is like chain mail interlinking of things, and that reminds me of not only the DNA but the Kabbalah and the Indra's net, where every bit of reality reflects every other bit of reality, and kind of like distinct sections of it there, kind of like the particles, I mean the grains that we're talking about, or like the hairs that the lion Manjushri rides on, reflecting everything else. Time is internal to the world, he points out. That's back to the general relativity. Time is not something that moves along while things are going along. Time, the measure of motion, as Aristotle said. But as I implied a moment ago, time is within things. So the more the energy, you know, the more it compresses into that point, time disappears. And that's eternal now. In fact, when he speaks about the Big Bang, you know, he speaks about the reality, all of reality, expanding out and then coming back again to a point. He calls it the Big Bounce. So, like the kalpas that the Hindus talked about, you know, there's this big expansion, the golden of an age, and then it comes back and it expands out again. This is what, you know, science is speculating about now. That it kind of comes back to a point of total concentration of energy, and then bounces back out again and comes back in again. And that's kind of like the dance of life. So when we're meditating, you know, we come back to experience that point, that timelessness, that concentrated energy, and then we bounce back into the interrelation of everything, into the relative, and then we come back to the absolute. We can do that not over trillions of years, but in a few minutes. Do that. He even uses the word nutshell, kind of like for that point that it comes into, which is what Julian of Norwich, in her vision of God, saw the universe as. Just this little nutshell, the hazelnut that God takes care of. So the sense that things can be reduced to a point, flash out again, and come back, and this continual exchange of energy is a very common view. Once again, he speaks about the prejudices we have to get over in our view of reality. And the time itself, as Zen would say, as Eckhart Tolle would say, as many would say, is really just an illusion. Einstein says, people like us who believe in physics know that the distinction made between past, present, and future is nothing more than a persistent, stubborn illusion. And so there's no time, past and future, cause and effect in Zen. You know, it's just now. And time is an illusion of our mind. that quote, by the way, I think Gloria Granville has it on her fireplace. It's worth keeping in your psyche. And his last chapter is on ourselves. In the review in the New York Times, it's kind of pessimistic. Well, no, it's just that he realizes that as a species, we're a little complicated, and we're not going to last as long as turtles or cockroaches, and we're kind of probably going to contribute to our own demise. You know? And he says that's okay. That's just the evolution. But he points out very well. This is something again Zen would totally agree with. We're not in nature. Even our minds, as he says, it's just all energy interacting, which is what Zen would also say. We are nature. Neurons in our brain, what we are nature, and we are nature. But there are different levels of energy exchange and consciousness, and he waxes poetic about that. Even free will, for example, comes into the dynamic of the energy. But since probability and unpredictability is built into the atom, this is something Elizabeth Johnson says in her book on Darwin too. It's the foundation for our free will, the possibilities that aren't determined by reality. So it's not Newtonian, where everything is clearly in straight line determined. That's not even what science is. So it's very interesting. But he does wax poetic about these levels of reality and how we get to the beauties of nature, etc. In his very last pages, he quotes Lucretius, ancient Roman poet. We are all born from the same celestial seed. All of us have the same father, from which the earth, the mother who feeds us, receives clear drops of rain, producing from them bright wheat and lush trees, and the human race, and the species of beasts, offering up the foods with which all bodies are nourished, to lead a sweet life and generate offspring. So there are frontiers where we are learning and our desire for knowledge burns. They are in the most minute reaches of the fabric of space, the origins of the cosmos, in the nature of time, in the phenomenon of black holes, in the workings of our own thought processes. Here on the edge of what we know, in contact with the ocean of the unknown, shines the mystery and the beauty of the world. And it's breathtaking. So when you do have an awakening experience, what you see is this magnificence and complicated interaction, this play, this beauty, the shining, the mystery and the beauty of the world. And it is breathtaking. I was going to relate that then to what another great scientific mystic said. Teilhard de Chardin. He was a mystic and he was a scientist, and it's amazing to see how some of what he says correlates here from a different perspective, and yet somewhat the same perspective. He has an interesting discourse on heat, by the way, and this comes in with what Stephen Hawking says: black holes are hot, and the heat is actually what generates energy and exchange and time. So that energy exchange and that energy expansion in terms of hot and cold. Well, listen to this. This is Teilhard speaking to God. It is not as a radiation of light, nor as subtilized matter that I desire you, nor was it thus that I described you in my first intuitive encounter with you. It was as fire. So we take the fire of God as all the tremendous images of the Bodhisattvas as fire, and the fire coming forth from the throne of God, or the Son of Man with eyes of fire and face burning like the sun, or living flame of love, or the fire coming forth, the stream of fire coming forth from the throne of God, or God himself as a consuming fire. All of this fits into this this dynamic of fire as it works its way all through the different levels of the universe. Wonderful image of the Sacred Heart by Robert Lentz, who spoke here. The Sacred Heart, Christ, with the planets in his hands and burning up with fire, the fire of the Sacred Heart. So Teilhard says, I can see I shall have no rest unless an active influence coming forth from you bears down on me to transform me. Fire transforms, energizes, burns up, and sets on fire. The whole universe is aflame. Like this. So let the starry immensities therefore expand into an ever more prodigious repository of assembled suns. Sounds like Valley here. Let the light rays prolong indefinitely at each end of the spectrum, the range of their hues and their penetrative power. Let life draw from yet more distant sources the sap which flows to its innumerable branches. Let us go on, endlessly increasing our perception of the hidden powers that slumber, the infinitesimally tiny ones that swarm about us, like the atoms, and the immensities that escape us because they appear to us simply as a point. From all these discoveries, each of which plunges him a little deeper into the ocean of energy, the mystic derives an unalloyed delight. Again, John Zen masters could be writing this. His thirst for them is unquenchable. He will never feel himself sufficiently dominated by the powers of the earth and the skies to be brought under God's yoke as completely as he would wish. Emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. God be right here, right now. It is God alone who, through his Spirit, stirs up into a fermented mass of the universe. So, any real mystic, including the Zen mystics, will include matter, will include the whole universe. Discover it right here, right now. Whether you're doing science, whether you're doing music, whether you're doing meditation, whether you're taking out the garbage, the universe is aflame.